Welcome everybody from wherever you are joining us in this panel, the first of the aquaculture panels here at the Economist World Ocean Summit. We're going to start off today by looking at how aquaculture can help increase food security sustainably. And I'm joined by people who truly believe in that proposition. We've got Tua Holm, Chief Technical Officer and co-founder of Atlantic Sapphire, which is the largest onshore aquaculture company in the world. We've got Manuel Baranja, who is Director of Fisheries and Aquaculture Division of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. We've got Flavio Corsin, who is Director of Partnerships at Aquaspark, a global investment fund based in the Netherlands that is developing aquaculture food systems by investing in companies along the aquaculture value chain. And he's also a steering group member of the Friends of Ocean Action Blue Food Partnership at the World Economic Forum. Rumaitha Al-Busaidi, who is the Group Manager of Business Development and Sustainability at the Fisheries Development Oman, which is investing in projects that lead to the development of a fisheries and aquaculture sector in the Sultanate, including shrimp farming, finfish, shellfish and seaweed ventures, as well as establishing support including industries that support that, like hatcheries and feed factories. So a real breadth of experience. But you'll find the full biographies of all our panelists on the screen under this media player. Welcome everybody and thank you for joining me today. I'm going to start with Flavio, put you on the spot a little bit. I hear that Friends of Ocean Action really do see blue food as an important part of our food system for the future. And I understand that you're developing a global sustainable aquaculture roadmap to 2030. As a steering group member of the Blue Food Partnership, where do you see opportunities to build partnerships and invest along the aquaculture value chain such that it can meaningfully contribute to sustainable food security? Flavio.
Thanks, Melanie. Good question. So for the ones of you less familiar with the Blue Food Partnership, it was launched recently, just in the fall of 2021, with the support of the UK Blue Planet Fund, Friends of Ocean Action, and which is part of the World Economic Forum. As you rightly said, I mean, that we are trying to establish this science-based roadmap for sustainable aquaculture, and the best way to do in partnerships. And if you look at the group that we have established, is very industry to investors to international organizations, non-profit, and of course research. This is also underpinned by the Blue Food assessments that basically provide a lot of the research behind this science-based roadmap. So with this setup, you can imagine that I wouldn't be able to pick a stakeholder group or a group of partners that would be more important, because it is really about bringing everybody around the table and to develop this roadmap, so that then we can reach the scale and ambition that we have. So if you think about it, I mean, just if you take an example, like you want to have growth of aquaculture, and you want to have, you have, of course, you're limited with the feed ingredients because you can't rely on the current supply of, for example, fish meal. So you're looking for alternatives, and if you look at the alternatives, you really need the partnerships from the ingredients all the way down to the market. I mean, you need the guys that develop the research and the solutions for those alternative ingredients. You need the feed manufacturers that need to adopt those solutions, the farmers to buy the feed and like the feed, and then the market to tell the story and to sell the products. And of course, you need the government to establish enabling frameworks. You need investors like ourselves to basically fuel the whole transition. So it's for us, the important part is really having an inclusive group, and everybody's welcome to join from wherever you are in the value chain or in the support framework is welcome to join this partnership, which grew from 10 members, I mean, just in the space of a couple of months, to 30 already, and we are of course continuing to grow further. Talking about opportunity for investment, if you look at the investments that we made the most recently, that's probably the best way to look at it. Is for me, it's really around aquatech. So precision.
We're going to come back to investment, Flavio. We're going to come back to investment. I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk about that as well. But it does already feel like we need an awful lot of people to collaborate to get everybody on the same track towards this ambition for 2030. So that's quite a challenge in itself. I'm glad that you're taking that challenge on with World Economic Forum. So, Tue, I want to turn to you now. Atlantic Sapphire is the world's biggest onshore aquaculture company. Salmon is arguably the king of farm species in terms of investment and trade. But with 2/3 of the biosphere being ocean and with sustainability and security of food being front of mind, why grow salmon on land instead of in the sea? Don't we need to move off land and use our aquatic resources for growing food?
Yeah, basically it's the whole point of taking on land, which we call a blue house technology, right, is very much to get control of our parameters, right? We basically get no exposure to our fish during having them on land and in a closed house, right? So we don't get any problems with parasites like sea lice, right, and diseases. We can keep them out of the whole environment we have there. We don't expose the fish to algae blooms, microplastics, and all of these kinds of things, right? So there's a lot of advantages of having that. And what generally has happened is that, of course, that the aquaculture has been happening in coastal areas, right? So we need to protect those coastal areas too, right? So and how can fish farming harm coastal areas is very much by, for example, fish escapes. Pollution, the effluents, right, like the feed that gets lost, the nutrients that comes from the fish, and that's something we solve very much by being here in South Florida, because what we have done here in South Florida with our blue house, that's of course the Dexon technology, but what's special about Atlantic Sapphire here in South Florida is that we actually have saltwater aquifers where we can take saltwater up, use it in the farm, and actually pump it down back deeper, which basically does that we have a zero impact on the ocean, right? And that brings me to kind of the next thing that I think we work a lot with is like that also enable us to be here in America with a production that's close to market, and therefore we don't have to air freight the fresh fish in, right? And therefore we have a much smaller CO2 impact than fish that's flown in from all over the world, which is very much the case today in the American market, right? And of course, the CO2 in relation to that is something that causes acidification of the sea, right? And that's really important that we try to solve this global thing, of course, from global warming, but also to saving the seas, right? And further on, and what we also are trying to do, as you saw with our collaboration with Spreading, is that we have a goal to in 2025 to not impact the ocean at all. We have this amazing opportunity that we already are not impacting it by our farming, but we also actually can look further up in the value chain and try to get rid of things that comes from the marine environment, and therefore have an absolute zero impact on the ocean with our farming method.
I'm interested to know, Manuel, how does FAO see aquaculture as part of nutrition security over the coming decade?
Yes, thank you, Melanie. Well, I'll start with a little story, actually. You know that in the year 2000, a group of experts, academic experts, projected how much aquaculture could grow by 2020, so 20 years ahead. And now that we know how much we produce in 2020, I can tell you that there were 58% underestimating aquaculture growth. So how could they get something so terribly wrong, almost 60% short of what we have produced? And that is because there wasn't enough understanding and appreciation of the technological advances that have taken place in the last 20 years, of the policy developments in terms of aquaculture production, particularly the role of globalization and international. So with that perspective, FAO is projecting how much we can grow aquaculture in the next decade, to 2030. And we estimate that aquaculture is going to grow approximately by just under 30% globally. to a total of about 108 million tons of fish, crustaceans, and mollusks. But we also have a higher target, a target that we call the blue transformation target, that will raise it to about 116 million tons. That will be just about 38% more than what we produce now. And this is not a given, of course. Growing aquaculture is not easy. And Fabio was mentioning, it is a value chain that we need to look after. There are many things that need to be done in that context, from governments providing proper policy frameworks to ensure that the producers know exactly what to expect and how to grow their product. Better use of our genetic material, both strains and species, to make sure that we maximize that production. Better use of biosecurity and disease controls, replacement or less dependency on fish meal for some of those products, and the development of the value chain throughout, because at the end of the day, this is a business and needs to work as a business. So this blue transformation agenda will bring us to this 116 million tons of production by the end of the decade is, in our view, essential. And it is essential because, of course, we all know that aquatic foods have a lower environmental impact than many land-based protein production. They are also much more efficient, in fact, in translating feed to flesh than land-based production. And if we don't do that, we're going to face a very significant problem. We already have 811 million people that are undernourished, 3 billion people around the world that cannot afford a healthy diet. And if we don't handle that problem seriously, we're going to face a very significant problem at the end of the decade. So aquatic foods are a significant part of the solution. Of course, they are not the only solution. And that is production on land, in the oceans, in lakes, in rivers, wherever we can do it sustainably with the right methods to secure feed for a population of close to 10 billion at the end of, or the middle of the century.
Brilliant. What a great bit of news there around your actual targeting and your forecasts for what's the possible, and a little bit of a stretch target there as well. And really a message around affordability, adaptability, about nutrition security and how appropriate this food system is for the planet. And I think that's what we're hearing all the way through. But we're very fortunate to have with us as well someone who's really trying to put this into practice at a country level on the ground. Rumaitha Al-Basaidi is with us from the Fisheries Development Company in Oman. Can you tell us a little bit about Oman's investment into aquaculture development? What were the drivers for that direction of travel, and what are the benefits and the challenges of aquaculture for Oman specifically?
Sure. Thanks, Melanie. Well, naturally, fisheries is one of the most important and one of the oldest sectors that we have in Oman. A lot of people associate the Arabian Peninsula, particularly the GCC region, with being heavy dependent on oil and gas. But if we predate our history before oil, fisheries was actually always the key contributor to our economy, and it remains as such. Oman is actually the largest fish producer in the GCC, and in fact, a net exporter of fish and fish products. And according to projections that we have, we're expected to grow that per year at 5.8%. Now, adding on to that as well, as a result of the oil price crash that we had experienced in 2016, the government very quickly sought out to boost the economy through diversification of other different sectors. And fisheries is one of those 5 key sectors that is focused on providing that and diversifying by weaning ourselves off of our reliance on oil and gas. Now, as Fisheries Development Oman, we are the government investment arm in fisheries, and our 5-year plan is to increase the contribution to the economy by $1.3 billion and creating over 6,000 economic opportunities by then. The key focus on where we're going to get those opportunities and that revenue is really focusing on aquaculture, and that's by creating a competitive advantage for the country, employing aquatech, which is new, innovative, and disruptive technologies, and culturing of new local species. We recently launched the first commercial Vaname shrimp farm back in December. The production capacity is at 4,500 tons, and the vision is actually quite big. In the next 5 years, we're looking at producing 25,000 tons of shrimp. And in terms of finfish, we're looking at producing 20,000 tons of finfish in the coming 5 years, opposed to the 3,000 tons that we're currently producing. But that's not all. we also acknowledge that there's a clear need to focus on research and development and also building local capacity. Because despite the fact that we have dabbed into fish way throughout our history, aquaculture, to be specific, is still very much in its infancy in Oman. So we're working hand in hand now with all key stakeholders to ensure that we elevate the level of research, we elevate the development of the infrastructure related to aquaculture, specifically focusing on innovation and technologies that look into culturing local species, and also better addressing the current workforce gap that we have. So we're trying to close the knowledge gap and translating it to best global practices and feeding it off into our local capacities, who hopefully will be able to contribute effectively and make aquaculture a thriving, globally competitive sector in Oman.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you. And it's just incredible to think that you have this sort of remit to move forward with these ambitious targets and get people aligned with you on that. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about how you're working with people on the ground as well as with your targets and policies. But first of all, Manuel, I want to come back to you, if I may. This is the UN's International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. And we know that not only is it critical to aquaculture production in small-scale producers, but also how aquaculture is a critical food system to them, and it's often very much overlooked. I believe FAO have invested considerably into sustainable aquaculture development on the ground and in particular in Africa. But where do you think investment is most needed at this small scale level? And what other kind of enabling actions do we need to put into place? Who needs to act around this?
Yes, thank you, Melanie. So first of all, as I mentioned early on, we need to grow aquaculture significantly, intensifying in some cases, expanding in some others. And only 2% of global production takes place in Africa. So this is an obvious place where investment needs to happen. Otherwise, in fact, the African continent, will be the only continent that will see a decrease in per capita fish consumption by the end of the decade. So in terms of geography, it is very clear. Now, when it comes to what to do and who to do it, and in the context of IAFA, I think it's important to recognize that IAFA, the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture, was put together to support small-scale production, particularly because we recognize that, first of all, it is a sustainable method of production as well. It's not the only way, but it is a sustainable method of production. And those communities that develop small-scale aquaculture need support. They tend to be they tend to face very significant power imbalances. They have unnecessary barriers to trade. They need support in order to maximize their contributions, because it's not only about producing more, but it's also about more of us contributing to the transformation of food systems that the UN Food System Summit of last September called for. And small producers are part of that solution. Now, who needs to act? Well, first of all, governments need to act. And by doing what? First of all, legislation that favors and that promotes the development of aquaculture, that facilitates the access to the business by small scale producers. They need to also develop public awareness campaigns to make sure that the product of aquaculture is better received by consumers as part of the solution, and also facilitate access to resources from those small scale producers. But the private sector has also a very significant role to play, because after all, aquaculture is a business, and it needs investment in its value chain development so that it reaches its business objectives as well as the food security objectives. Well, I think what is very important is that we are at the moment in a very tricky situation, because I mentioned early on that we have 811 million people that are undernourished, and at the same time the price of food has reached a 10-year high in 2021. So this is a situation that needs to be handled. And aquatic foods not only have been demonstrated to be very significantly relevant to improving the nutrition of the planet, but are actually some of the more accessible resources and more affordable resources. So, for example, even though the price of food has been rocketing over the last year and a half, the price of fish has not. So it provides a solution, particularly for places where either affordability or accessibility is a problem. Now, just to finish by saying that small-scale producers have to be part of the solution, because because we need a world with better solutions than we currently have. And it just cannot just be a matter of big producers producing large amounts of food. It's about distributing the production and therefore the distribution and the access of food across the world. That's part of what we need to do, and the FAO will remain committed to do so.
But when we're talking about those kind of enabling regulations and the adaptability, the species and so on of aquaculture, I think the other piece that's in there that's really important is this kind of training on the ground as well for the development of sustainable aquaculture. Getting this balance right between being able to create that nutrition, create that trade. But this is a lot of where investment and education and research comes in as well. Flavio, I'm going to come to you. You're engaging with kind of aquaculture development on lots of levels, at small scale and commercial. And through that investment lens with Aquaspark, as well as through this super big collaborative platform in the Blue Food Partnership, where do you see the most innovative ways countries are working to increase sustainable aquaculture production and food security? And what do you think needs to happen to really accelerate that good change so that we can see those benefits that Manuel's been talking about for everybody?
Yeah, thanks. So let's say there are three areas that I would pick that are more in terms of innovation and more promising. I mean, one is what Manuel was mentioning, Africa. I mean, if you look at our latest investment, we made an investment now in an African producer that produces in 3 countries, and I think the potential for the continent is enormous and is underexploited, and we see an opportunity there for returns and a huge impact as well. The second one, which is probably my favorite, is around the aquatech, and I will tell you a bit more maybe when you have to pinpoint a single solution. So let me park it for a second. The third one will be around the low trophic species, which is around seaweed or bivalves, things that are regenerative aquaculture. On aquatech, I'm a great enthusiast of aquatech, actually, because of the huge advantages that you can have by adopting this so-called precision aquaculture. And it's applicable to the small scale, and we have investments that are supporting small scale producers on that, but also for the large scale, for the salmon producers, for example. So it's great for the farmer. The farmer basically gets a better financial returns because you reduce your cost of production, you feed less to produce the same amount of fish. It's better for the environment because there is less pollution going in and less waste feed, if you want, going into the system. It's better for the fish. You have better health. You have better recognition of the status, the welfare status of a stock. It's better for employees. There are a lot of AI, artificial intelligence applications that help in recognizing how to use the workforce better in a way in which it responds better, is trained better, it's happier. So it all works together more as a system. And I wanted just to mention that there is we are issuing a report on our Aqua Insight report, an Aquatech report that basically provides as a free report. It's just for everybody to look at why we are so excited about this, which is going to come out in April this year. But these, I think, are the things that I would pinpoint. Of course, we make investments on other things that are equally innovative, but those are my favorite, let's say.
Your favorite. Okay, so what I'm really hearing is this diversity, and sometimes that diversity actually gives us great complexity because we heard about all those stakeholders you need, all these opportunities, and that massive different options can be very confusing. Tu, I want to come back to you, if I may. Aquaculture is so diverse and it's applicable to both small scale, high value commercial markets. We can bring it on shore, we can take it offshore, we can do it in lots of different aquatic opportunities. It really is being hailed as a truly appropriate food for planet and people, even though we're not always managing to get it to the heart of those food system conversations. What I'd love to know from you is how do you think the private sector sees aquaculture opportunities, and what kind of strategies and technological breakthroughs in that value chain do you expect to be coming through in the next few years? And what I'm also interested in is how we can kind of take those promising breakthroughs at a commercial level, and how those can go then to support and benefit small scale producers by passing that learning on.
Yeah, it goes back to what Manuel said before, right? Is that the technologies and the expectations of how aquaculture is growing has often been underestimated in great schemes, right? And people often talk a lot about the problems and not the solutions, right? We see it from our side, that the land-based aquaculture is in infant state, right? We started 10 years ago, and we are the largest producer now, but there's so many things we can improve. Our technology is very costly, so as you said in the introduction, it's not for everybody. But as we see it, as technology improves, the cost will come down as the technology gets more, like with using AI to make it more simple and cheap to operate. And you have genetics, which today the genetics for many species are being bred to the environments that they are in the ocean or in water ponds or whatever that they are in the traditional farming systems. And as soon as people start focusing more on making genetics for these new ways of farming, the cost of production will go down, because the increase of growth of the fish will increase enormously, right? So there's a lot of technology opportunities.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to intersect, you think there's enough there to attract that level of investment in this as a food system, because we can see those opportunities. Does it look that attractive to the outside world?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, with the benefits that we can do, right? I think it is, and I think we've proven that in many ways, right? But of course, it can be much more, and it has to be brought much more forward, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, so we're getting short on time now. I want to, if I may, come back to Rumetha. We've heard a couple of times in here, and I think we're familiar, we work in this field, that aquaculture isn't always viewed favourably. And yet on this panel, we believe it's one of the most sustainable and appropriate food systems there is. And you did mention that there's a good culture of eating fish, which is a great start. But I wonder if you can speak to how aquaculture is being viewed by consumers in Oman, and how do you engage the community and the people on the ground in these ambitious plans? Are they being understood and kind of embraced at a local level?
Sure. I think with the efforts we're putting on the ground, we have more and more of a consumer base who are aware of aquaculture. And I think the way that we are trying to engage this is going way up and finding a champion. For us, it's the ruler of the country himself, who actually talks about aquaculture and its importance to the economy during his local visits with local leaders in various parts of the country. And this only shows the importance of focusing on another sector rather than depending on something that we've always dependent on, right? And we're seeing more and more of the locals as well embracing aquaculture, as well as other key stakeholders in civil society, as a result of a solution that came due to the cyclones that have been hitting a lot of the local, the coast, that has affected a lot of the farming areas. So a lot of them have transformed their farm areas into smallholder recirculating aquaculture systems that has really alleviated their livelihood as well as a result. So the way we engage with the community is through mostly grassroots efforts and dialogue, but also showing that we are an entity that exists to support. At the end, we don't have the name or the word development in the middle of our name for nothing. So we really believe in the values of sustainability, responsibility, and excellence. And we believe that we're responsible to the local community, to the environment, and main stakeholders. And we wouldn't have it any other way. I think in the end, we all have to work together to the betterment of the country, the betterment of the sector. And without the local support, I don't think we'd ever get there, especially in a sector that's still, people are still kind of trying to understand how it works. But when we talk about sustainability, we truly need to think of a way that we fundamentally also change the way we view food and fish in particular. As a country that has a really high consumption of fish per capita, it means accepting less desirable fish species, for instance, and that requires a lot of real change that takes a lot of effort and sacrifice to what feels familiar to us. Basically, that's what we're trying kind of to do, to really push the message to the consumer, is that we produce what you actually need. And until the day comes that over half the planet wakes up and decides that they actually prefer to eat shellfish and seaweed rather than salmon or grouper, I think the best way we can realistically ask is to produce the fish at the lowest environmental impact and cost as possible. And this is what we're seeking to do. And I think the message is aquaculture isn't that big, bad, immoral money juggernaut that we're used to seeing in documentaries everywhere. It is only facilitating what the consumer demands of an ocean that may be very, very far off the land because of overexploitation, is no longer able to provide it. So I think it's important that we all work together with all stakeholders to ensure that the sector is sustainable.
Well, and perhaps the other opportunities that you're also creating around livelihoods and all of those kind of ancillary industries that are connected to the aquaculture as well. So there's a lot of benefit beyond the nutrition as well. So good luck with that. Flavio, I'm going to take a risk on giving the Italian, the floor for another 1 minute, but I cut you short talking about investment earlier. And when we listen to, Manuel, and we hear about the investment that's needed to enable and develop the small scale, at a commercial level, if you like, at a value chain level. And we hear from Tuo where we've had a lot of investment to get this far with onshore aquaculture. You're kind of our investment expert here. Tell me in 30 seconds, where would you see the most investment for this highly sustainable development of nutrition security over the next decade?
So I mentioned already Aquatech has been applicable for small-scale producers, applicable to a lot of the food security species, tilapia, pangasius, for the domestic market in Indonesia, for example. And I mentioned Africa. Our investments are large-scale, commercial producers. But there are two things that can happen. We need to develop a pipeline which starts from the smallholders and then it grows into basically becoming businesses which become investable businesses. But the second, we need to structure the industry in a way in which it operates within, lakes or catchments, in a way in which it works in a sustainable way. And that can be done looking at the expertise and the inputs provided by the commercial aquaculture and developing so-called outgrower programs, where basically you provide seed, feed, and market access to the smallholders, and you help them to grow in an organic way, in a sustainable way, not everybody on their own. I think that are two key things that I would say for food security, that definitely places in which we are investing.
Okay, so that investment is really, if I may use the terms, top down in terms of the big investment and how we can translate that into good for all. And then also you mentioned the pipeline coming through from the small scale, but also changing the kind of systems and the way that those work, bringing them more into like area management, for example, so they recognise the impact on each other and perhaps benefit by scale. I'm going to have to leave it there. This has been kind of like a bit of a speed dating approach to exploring how aquaculture can contribute to sustainable food security. And I think we are in no doubt that is absolutely true. It's been the fastest growing food production industry for the last 5 decades. And I think we all take some pride in that, as long as it's done responsibly and appropriately. And there's a lot of us trying to make sure that happens, from the UN through to the private sector and the NGOs and the standard holders, all working together with the investors. So, the adaptability, the 600 odd species of aquatic foods, and this high diversity is going to give us enormous opportunities, so we can make sure that it suits everyone. But the true opportunity for sustainable food security hasn't really yet been fully appreciated outside of the sector itself, despite all of our work. And I think we've still got to focus on that very solidly. And that's why it's wonderful to have the opportunity of a panel like today, where this is really going out on a global level as part of a bigger conference. It's important to get this message over. We do need these, we do need to ground our investments and our decision making and our practices in scientific findings. And we can be excited and challenged by those kind of targets that FAO are putting out there in their blue transformation targets, which is such a great term. But collectively, we've got to amplify this voice of aquaculture in policy and investment, that climate change appropriate food systems need aquaculture to be able to provide critical nutrition for everybody. So I want to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists today and thanking the economists. This is the 9th Annual Economists World Ocean Summit. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today. And can I ask everybody to stay tuned for more panels about aquaculture, which we think are increasingly important, and they're coming up today. Thank you all very much.